everyone, and welcome to the Squad Room Podcast, the place for cops who want to transform their leadership, create more resilience, and generate more balance in their lives. On this show, we cover the tactics and strategies you can use every day to create a life worth living, both in and out of uniform. My name is Garrett Tesla. I'm a full-time sergeant for a sheriff's office in Southern California, and I'm glad you're with us today. Before we get to our guest, I want to remind you of a few things. First, if you're on social media, make sure you're following us at the Squad Room and that you've liked our Facebook page. Also, make sure you join our Facebook group. Just search the Squad Room group to join on Facebook. But most importantly is that you head over to thesquadroom.net and get signed up for our mailing list. People on that list get exclusive access to free resource downloads and additional information every week. And I also send out content there that is just for them, so don't miss out on something that can help you in your life or your career. So join our list at thesquadroom.net. You know, something else, if you've been listening to this show for quite a while now, or even a little bit of time, you've noticed that the music has changed at the beginning. And gone is the minute-something-long intro, which I love. I wrote it, and I hired some opera singer with a Grammy Award to do the voiceover, and I added all the sound effects myself, and I was probably overly proud of that thing. But if you've listened to the show for a long time, the music is familiar. It's the old music. It's the old intro music that I used, for the first 100-some episodes of the show, or maybe not quite that, but give or take. And it's a little stinger, they call them in the industry, that I love. And frankly, it reminds me of my favorite band, U2. But, we're making some changes to the show. I'm adapting as I evolve. And to me, one of the things was getting into the intros a little quicker. So I just feel like I should share that with you. I don't know why, but if you listen to the show for a long time, I know some people like the intro or got motivated by the intro, and that's great. But still the same show, same content, but going back to some basics, but also moving forward. I don't know if that makes any sense. Can you even do that? Can you go backwards and forwards at the same time? You know, it sounds like I'm trying to make excuses, but I'm not. So if this is your first time listening, none of this makes sense to you. Thanks for being here. We're going to have a great episode today. My guest is Adam Kinakin. Adam is the managing director and the founder of the International Law Enforcement Training Network. It's a community-based training platform designed for creating and facilitating international law enforcement training. What he's done is pretty incredible because Adam is not a cop, and he talks about that in the episode today and why he didn't become a cop. But he's a former infantry officer with the Canadian Armed Forces. He's held a variety of roles from admin officer to platoon commander and incident commander for a training officer as well. And he was multiple instructor certifications in use of force, defensive tactics, instructional design, security operations, et cetera, et cetera. One of the most impressive things that Adam has done is in 2020, he put on, in the middle of the pandemic, at the very beginning almost of the pandemic, he put on the International Law Enforcement Training Summit, which was really one of the first time I'm aware of anyway, that there was a completely online training conference. And the attendance was like 10,000 officers from 75 countries. Pretty fantastic. The Islet Network, as it's known, has multiple partnerships with a variety of federal, state, provincial, and municipal agencies, NGOs all over the world. And Adam holds a degree in psychology. He's got 4 kids under the age of 5, and he's working on his master's and his PhD in forensic psychophysiology. The man is like the Energizer Bunny. We've talked several times recently. I was on his show. He's also got a podcast, of course, the Tactical Breakdown podcast, which I was a guest on when it was in its early stages, and we talk about that. And you can check that out. It's a great show. He moves at a speed that I am envious of, and you could probably hear it in my voice as we talk today about how his passion drives his decisions and it drives what he's doing in his life post-military. And he gives one of the best answers to a question I've ever heard on the podcast, and I'm going to tease it there and leave it. And so please welcome Adam Kinakin of the International Law Enforcement Training Network. You know, when we think about the equipment we carry with us on our person, we often assume that it's our sidearm that's the most important. But I disagree. Sure, it's important. But think about how important your radio is and how often you use it. Statistically, you're likely to go your entire career without ever firing your sidearm. However, you won't go more than a few minutes in patrol without using your radio. It's your lifeline to the outside world. It's how we call for help, set up a perimeter, request an ambulance, or maybe a supervisor. And think about it. If you do end up using your sidearm on duty, it's very likely that the next thing you'll use is your radio to tell dispatch shots fired. Our radios are incredibly important to our jobs and to help keep us and our partners safe. And it's important to make sure that you're using quality equipment. We can't control the quality of the radio we're issued by our department, but we can often control some of the accessories that we use to make them better and make us safer. I'm proud that ComGear Supply is a sponsor of this episode. Head over to ComGearSupply.com and you will see their massive inventory of microphones, earpieces, speakers, batteries, headsets, push-to-talk sets, and everything else you need to help you stay in comms and stay safe. Their customer service team will help you make sure you get the right accessories compatible with your system. Now, here's the coolest part about ComGear Supply and why I'm so proud that they work with us. They have a line of duty protection warranty on many of their products. Yeah, that's right. If your gear ever breaks in the line of duty, they'll replace it. And prices are tax-free, and it's always free shipping on orders inside the U.S. and even to some parts of Canada. Go to ComGearSupply.com right now and use that coupon code THESQUADROOM to get 10% off your order. Make sure you also follow them on Instagram at ComGear Supply and let them know that you appreciate their support of the show. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, brother. Glad to be here, man. This is exciting.
You got to wing it sometimes. Adam, I read your bio here, before we started, but tell people about you and the International Law Enforcement Training Network. What are you doing over there?
Yeah, man. Well, real simply, first of all, man, I appreciate you having me on here. We it's been a while since we were running this back. We did this a while ago, and just exciting to see what you're doing. I'm glad you have the podcast still up and running. I think that's phenomenal. Love what you do, always have. My background, super shit simple. I was I was with the Canadian Forces for a short period of time. I got to do a lot of really cool things. Ended up as a training officer for our regiment, and it kind of reinvigorated the love I have for being an instructor. I was always a martial arts instructor, defensive tactics. I did stuff on the private security side of things. When I released from the forces, I got into a lot more of the private security side of training, and then into the law enforcement side of things with organizations like ILET. And it was just a really neat way for me to share my knowledge and experience, was to start the Tactical Breakdown podcast, which and that snowballed very, very rapidly into what the ILET network is today. And so yeah, I mean, we can talk about anything you want in terms of ILET or the podcast, or what we do right now for facilitating international training.
Yeah, I was on one of the very early episodes of the Tactical Breakdown. I think you invited me on. Thank you for having me. That was a lot of fun. And I remember when you reached out and you were talking about I think you were still starting the show, and it was kind of in the beginning stages, and you hadn't really put anything out yet, but you had some bare bones ideas of what you wanted the show to look like, and it evolved rather quickly. And then, like you said, taking that podcast and then turning it into the International Law Enforcement Training Network, like you did, and then adding things like the training summit you did in like July of 2020. Like, the speed at which you've moved is I think is impressive for anybody. And we've talked since I've been on your show, and knowing the busy lifestyle you're leading, I want to go a couple different directions with our conversation today. One, because you have this scope of training internationally, I think it's interesting to learn what's challenging for Canadians versus Australians versus New Zealanders versus the English or anywhere else, or where the similarities are. But also, there's a lot of cops with a side hustle, and there's some entrepreneurial spirit there that I want to tap into or talk about. You have, like, how many kids under the age of 5 or 6?
Four kids
Four,
under 5.
Four kids under 5, which that just makes my brain hurt thinking about it.
Yeah, tell you what, if you can figure out what's causing it, please let me know.
Well, I have some ideas. We'll talk about them off mic, but you probably don't want to stop any of those. So anyway, I think let's start with why did you feel the need, or did you see the need for an international law enforcement training network like you created, and explain what that is, because though it's very popular now, obviously there are people out there that don't know about it. Tell us what you did and how you created that.
Yeah, real well, I appreciate that, man. Very simply, the ILET network is really the what it is in the title. It's a network. It is a collaboration of instructors, trainers, experts, innovators, researchers, academics, legal professionals from around the world that are sharing the most up to date, scientifically backed training practices that we know that we can utilize in not only just the law enforcement space. I mean, we work in private security, we do training for corrections, we do training for sheriffs and other public safety units. And of course, there's always military components to that. With my background, we always loop that in there somewhere. And so it's truly a community of like-minded people that just want to create a better training and create a better standard for what we do across the board. That's it. Um, and that's really just it's as simple as that. It doesn't get any easier, man. Everything we do is about putting actionable, relevant training out to as many people as possible. That's our mission statement as a company. As much actionable and relevant training to as many people as possible. I'd throw defensible in there as well, because obviously we've seen what's happened over the last 2 years, and a lot of high profile cases with officers being charged. So whatever we do and whatever we train has to be defensible in whatever region of the world you are in. But people just don't have access to training that they need. Some do. Some agencies are, man, they're at the forefront of this training thing. They are innovating, they are spending the money, they are bringing in experts from outside of the law enforcement sphere to share knowledge and expertise to help develop better training curriculum. But that's not the majority. That's actually like a fringe minority, right? I mean, with over 17,000 law enforcement agencies in the US alone, I would say probably a good 16,000 of those are criminally underutilized or underfunded when it comes to training. And that's a problem, man. And that's not just in the United States. That's something that is occurring internationally across the board. In Canada, in Australia, in the United Kingdom, South America, in most of Europe, it's really across the board. And so when I have the opportunity to have conversations, I was just on an hour long call with the training guys from the Australian border force yesterday. Um, they're having the same problems that we are. It's so crazy. And so what we're trying to do is utilize this community that we have, this network, to share best practices. Right? What are we doing that can help them? What are they doing that can help us? I'm sure you've experienced this in your career. You'll hear about people that are doing things differently in other agencies or organizations, and you say, well, that sounds better than what we're doing. Why don't we have access to that? And usually the answer is because there's some type of red tape, right? Somebody doesn't want to share their toys, or that's not the way we do it. The way we do it the same way the last 20 years and it works fine, so we're going to stick with what we're doing, or you know insert excuse here. What we want to do is we want to break down that barrier and say, listen, I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you're doing. Let's give you access to that information so you can utilize it. There's no this idea of one size fits all training is bullshit. Sorry if I can't swear on your podcast, but that is just what it is, right? There's this one size fits all. Well, if it works in New York and it works in LA, it'll work right across the US. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, right? And so the problem is right now is that we have this shift, this huge shift into online training that occurred because of the pandemic, right?
Right.
I'm
Hmm.
sure you've seen that.
I'm aware.
The so
Familiar with the pandemic.
here's the funny thing. People are like, okay, well, what's he going to say? Our entire company was built on online training, right? So now I'm going to shit all over myself and basically say we need to get back to in-person training. But here's the caveat to that. The last 2 years, what have administrators seen when it comes to budget and training? They've seen We've gotten the checks in the box from the liability component. Legal team has said, hey, your officers have the required training that they need because we did this online training component. The administration sees, well, shit, we saved 80% on doing online training. And so why would we ever go back to in-person training? If we're checking the box, we don't have to worry about civil action because we've covered that. And now we're going to just basically take the rest of that training away from those officers because it's going to save us a buck. You're basically spending a dime, or you're spending a dollar to save a dime, or whichever way that analogy works. It is so ridiculous to me that we have this push one way or the other. You know, in law enforcement, in the training space especially, we have this giant pendulum that I'm sure you're aware of. I'm sure you've talked about this before, how it swings back and forth, right?
Yep, yep.
1 year you get nothing, 2 years later you get everything, and then it just goes back and forth. We're not right now. The problem is that everybody wants to polarize on this. Either they want to stay everything online, or they want to either push everything to in person, both of which are the wrong answer. The answer is it depends, right? The answer is what works best for your individual agency, for you to serve your community, and for you to train your officers. It's not about what works best in city A, B, or C, or in this country or in that country. It comes down to that individual decision by department. And it comes down to, what are you training? We know, and we've established that certain training can be done very, very well, and learning can occur exceptionally well in an online training platform, depending on what we're teaching. We also know that there are a lot of skill sets that need to be hands-on, that we've taken out of the mat rooms, out of the ranges, and said, let's try to make this work in person, and it's online, and it's not working. It needs to be in person. And so what we're trying to establish with the network, with this collaboration of instructors, is, where is that line? Because there's a line in there somewhere, and it's going to be different for every department. But where is that line where we say, you know, that up to this point, all of this content and all of this training can be done online, and it can be done efficiently, and it can be done effectively. We know that. Let's make sure we maintain that so that we can then take the rest of the budget that we've saved there and now increase and put that into the in-person training and establish better in-person training. And when we get the in-person training, we reduce the amount of time that's spent in the academic component, which is my biggest pet peeve with training, dude, is when you have somebody running a defensive tactics program and you spend the first half a day talking about policy and procedure. You could be spending that entire day on the mats. Why are you wasting time sitting in a mat room talking about academic components when that package could be sent out 2 weeks earlier to all of the people taking part and saying, hey, this is your homework, review this before you get here. And when you get here, we're going to test on it first thing in the morning. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to interleave those components into the hands-on training. So as we're going through the motions, as we're doing drills, as we're doing scenarios, you can break off and say, hey, in reference to this policy, in reference to this case law, how does this apply? What is it? What do you think about this? And then you actually get them to engage in that. And we know from an adult learning perspective that you're going to get a lot better retention from that learner. But the important skill set that we teach is critical thinking. And that is the biggest thing that's left out in training, is the critical thinking component. It's all about right now, teach skill, evaluate skill, right? And that's it. What we want them to do is we want to teach them the skill, but then we want them to be able to contextualize that skill and use it in practice. And
Mhm.
but when I say in practice, I don't mean like, baseball practice. What I mean is in use, in the
Right.
field. As they're doing it throughout their career, we need to make sure there's no sense in me teaching you a technique or in defensive tactics class if you're never going to be able to use it or know when to use it, right? Big difference in context if we're teaching CEW, so some type of conductive energy weapon, and firearm in conjunction, whether you're doing, support side draw, cross draw, whatever. We've seen what just happened with the Kim Potter trial with the weapon confusion, right? She stated in that trial that at no point did they ever conduct scenarios where she had to work through an option where she either had to draw a firearm or draw her taser. She knew what was coming in prior to walking right into that scenario. That's an error in training. That's not on her. That's on whoever developed that training program because
Mhm.
they just didn't know what they were doing. And so, what we're trying to do is change that standard of instructor so that every bit of training that every officer gets is at a higher level. Because if we can make the instructors better, it means that every officer that that instructor teaches is going to become better. And so it's kind of the fastest way to implement wholesale change across the board. So I hope I didn't ramble on too much, but I hope that explains kind of where we're coming from.
Yeah, no, it generates a lot of interesting topics because networking is something I think that is generally lacking from law enforcement, but it's getting a lot better. I mean, from when I started to now, even something as kind of silly as a LinkedIn profile can connect people together, but it's very obviously superficial. But to take to take it into a deeper context and put people in the same room, whether it's actually in a room or if it's in a Zoom meeting or whatever from around the world, is is really, it's something that we are now capable of doing. I'm curious from your perspective, because of the pandemic, and for example, at my agency, our quarterly training shut down for 2 or 3 cycles while we couldn't be in person, and it took some time to spin up some different options, right? And mad props to my training bureau because they adapted very quickly to this. And I'm in California where we have a pretty robust post that has a lot of stuff online. So you're getting the check the box stuff done, right? And you're kind of muddling through those first phases of this pandemic. But what I'm seeing now, and I'm seeing this in other areas too, is people are realizing that some of this can be done online, and it doesn't have to be the way we always used to do it. And like you touched on too, I think I've also seen the other side of it, the extreme side of it, where people are now pushing or pitching and promoting ideas that really shouldn't be done online, um, or that need to have an in-person element to them, either defensive tactics or firearms training, like the kinds of stuff like, no, you can't really shoot there in your office with the Zoom and during the Zoom training session. You need to be out on the range, right? But what my question in all that is, what are the things you're seeing succeed well online, that can stay there online, that we can maybe utilize or maximize our efficiencies there so that we have more time on the mats or at the range?
Mhm. Yeah, great question. So, and you're gonna hate my answer because the answer is always going to be it depends, right? It depends on the individual learner, and I think that's always the crux of this is when you're on a training course. I try to say this to new instructors when we're teaching. If you have a new course and I'm training 30 officers, I'm not running one course for 30 officers. I'm running 30 different courses, essentially. Now,
Hmm.
that's being a little bit hyperbolic. Obviously, there's probably a lot of overlap in there, so I'm not necessarily teaching, something 30 different ways. But the idea still stands is that I may need to contextualize information for each individual learner depending on their level of experience, right? Depending on the way that they learn, the way they retain information, and there's all of these components from an adult learning perspective that we have to take into account to generalize. To answer your question, obviously there's physical skill sets and motor learning that have to be conducted in an in-person environment, right? We know that.
Hmm.
But that being said, there are hybrids to that. So you can take, so for example, let's take firearms as a starting point.
Okay.
Most people will agree that at the end of the day, you have to put rounds downrange. I think we can all agree on that.
Everyone agree with that except the guy who has to pay for the bullets.
Right. 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 Just say pew pew. It's the same thing. Um the but here's the thing. There are a lot of fundamentals of firearms training that don't require live rounds going downrange.
Sure.
There is a
Yeah.
lot of fundamentals. And so it could be something as simple as interleaving. So we love this concept of interleaving, right? Which is basically taking training components that would normally be taught in silo. So I'm going to teach you speed, I'm going to teach you accuracy, I'm going to teach you draw, I'm going to teach you cover and concealment, I'm going to teach you movement, I'm going to teach you optics, I'm going to teach you safety, all of these things. And now we start putting them all together so that in practice, the officer is used to doing those things in conjunction with one another, right? Because that's where it's going to fall apart in the street. And so in training, it works the same way. If we can interleave in-person and online training, maybe you have a component where, initially they sit down with an instructor in a classroom and the instructor goes over, hey, this is your stuff, this is what we're using, right?
Mhm.
Now I'm going to pass you online and you're going to watch 8 training modules, core learning objectives about how your firearm operates, what retention systems are we using, what types of draws do we use, why and why do we do certain types of draws, right? Those types of things. All these are the optics that you are using. Here's how the optic functions. If it's a red dot, right? Talking about, hey, listen, if you have a brand new aim point acro optic, it has an enclosed emitter, which means you don't have to worry about dust or water or anything getting inside of your emitter and screwing up your sight picture. But maybe you have an open, like an RMR, where you have an open emitter, and now that emitter, if it gets any dust or dirt in it, you can't trust your sight picture anymore, right? Using that optic. Like simple concepts that you don't need to be on the range to understand that concept, right? So, what components can we teach online? That stuff's very easy. Now, when we go back to the range, we say, hey, somebody explain to me this concept or this concept, and then it's rehashed. It gets brought back up again, which helps us retain the information, right? When we teach, we learn. So if you can get its students, you can get the officers to repeat and kind of reteach the class what those components were. It helps instill that learning component. And now, as you're going through the training again, we go on the range and we go, okay, man, so let's talk about those draws. And so we start showing draws. We start showing from different types of holsters. Maybe they're coming in, maybe they're working some type of plain clothes where they have a lower level of retention on their holster as compared to like a level 3 for a patrol officer, depending on where you are in the world, right? Everyone up here in Canada, officers all have level 3 for their standard holsters for their duty pistol. Maybe we're going to practice those draws on the range, and then the officer gets sent home with some homework and say, hey, when you're at home, here's some skills and drills that we're going to show you. The instructor is going to instill in you on the range. And now what happens though is those drills are also recorded by that instructor or by the instructor team. And now the officer has access to that while they're at home or while they're in the office, and they can practice those skills off range.
Mhm.
And it's and again, continuous learning, but it's online now, right? And then they're getting that. And then next time they go back to the range, if they have difficulties or questions, they can ask the instructor when they're in person again. But what we're doing is we're optimizing the time at the range and we're optimizing the time off of the range. And then you can do that for every skill set, right? And so that's a way we can take and interleave the training components, but while still maintaining like the optimum amount of training time. Because that's what it is. Training is time and money. You know that. Everybody here listening to this knows that. It comes down to time and money. So if you can save in one, you can usually give more in the other. If you have more money, you get more time. Right? If you
Mhm.
save time, you save money. Kind of same
Right.
idea. So um, a lot of components that we teach online that are so again, there's also some things that are counterintuitive. For example, a lot of people think de-escalation training can be done online, right? A lot of de-escalation training or non-escalation training or pre-escalation training or insert buzzword here, that can be sure you can teach components of that online. You can teach the academics of it, you can teach the psychological components of it. But what are we really talking about? The skill set that in practice is interpersonal communication with another human being. So
Right.
if you do not have interpersonal communication with another human being in a room, you are not getting that practical application of that skill set, right?
Right.
So
Mhm.
you're getting the check in the box because you did it online, and they're saying this is how to, not escalate a situation or to maintain calm or how to reduce this person's stress or blah, 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 whatever we're teaching. That's great. The concept is great. but it comes down to practice. You've seen it
Mhm.
just as many times as I have, where you have somebody who's brand new and they have no experience dealing with somebody who's like very difficult. And it's as a human being, when another human being's being extremely aggressive with you, it's kind of it's a shock to the system the first time it happens. For the
Sure,
first
yeah.
couple times it happens, you need to build up that experience. Would we rather have that happen first time, real time, when the shit hits the fan on the street, or would you rather have that happen multiple times over and over again in training, so that when the officer gets to the street, they've contextualized that information and they can apply it in practice? And so there's a misunderstanding of what we can teach online and what we can't teach online. A great
Mhm.
example of something that can be taught online that's traditionally done in person are armorers courses. I had this discussion the other day with some firearms instructors. I said, I don't know why there would ever be another in-person armorers course. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, if you think about it, I go to an armorer's course. I have the instructor sitting up at the front on their bench. I'm sitting back in the class on our bench. We all have our weapons. And he goes, okay, everybody come up here. And then you watch them do the skills and drills on it. And here's how I do this. And here's how I fix this. And you're like, hey, great. Go back to your station. You do it yourself. They walk around. They answer any questions you have. But it's kind of this give and take, right?
Right. Yeah.
You've had so with you, I'm sure you've had some things happen at home, whether it's a plumbing issue or a furniture issue or a car issue. And I'm sure there's some point where you've pulled out your phone and watched a YouTube video on how to fix that. Has that ever
Phew.
happened to you before?
Pretty much anything in my house that's gotten fixed has been a
Okay.
YouTube video and a Home Depot run.
Why do you do that?
It works, right?
It works
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
I can literally watch a video real time of somebody fixing a problem and I can do it step by step. I can pause it, I can replay it, and I can go through it at my speed as much as I need to.
Right.
Armory is the same thing. I can have an armor showcase and video performing a skill, a drill, a conversion, or whatever it is, fixing a malfunction, whatever, a replacement. All of that happens. You can record it. So if this is your issue, I go into and I can pull up that video and
Mhm.
literally it can walk me through that step by step every single time. It's it's kind of like I'm a big fan of Gary V. I don't know if you
Oh,
ever
yeah.
listen to him. Um, obviously a very flamboyant personality, especially in the online marketing space. But he does a lot of keynotes, and in one of his keynotes, um, he says it's ridiculous that we teach in the United States that you guys still teach who like past presidents of the United States. And he was being kind of hyperbolic in it, but he said it used to be knowledge was transferred, right? It used to obviously throughout human history, it was verbal communication, passed, stories passed verbally, and then we developed the written word, and then we could pass things through writing, and then it turned into video and photography, and we could pass things through that, right? Like we keep evolving.
Mhm.
But for me it used to be if I was an academic, it was what's in my brain and what can I recall when I need it. Nowadays, we have this really neat tool called Google, where if somebody asks me a question, I don't need to be an expert in that subject matter anymore. I can literally bring it up on the internet in 3 seconds, right? So, why
Mhm.
are we taking time on these memory skills when it's not necessary for the world that we live in? You probably grew up in the same generation that I did, where they said, where when we learned math and you learned long division, well, you'll never have a calculator with you at all times because at the time calculators were ginormous. Now we all have a phone, or at least you
Right.
have access to a phone or some type of computing software that does all of those calculations for you in a fraction of a second. So, is it necessary for us to teach math skills? Somewhat. You could argue. I would say it's probably more important to start teaching our kids how to manage money and finances and
Yeah.
again, look at the component there though. It's the application in practice of the skill. Same thing that we're trying to do with officers. It's the application in practice. And
Mhm.
so, long way to answer your question. There are certain things that we can do online that work better online, that just fit in with technology, the way things have evolved. But again, there are certain things I cannot teach you how to, apply handcuffs watching a video. I can teach it to you, but until you get there, you have to get hands on and get reps in.
Yeah.
And so there are things that we can do, and there's things that we can't do.
How many times have you damaged your gear while on duty? Chances are it's a lot. So, why don't companies have a protection guarantee to replace gear that has been damaged in the line of duty? ComGear Supply is the first and only tactical communication company that has a line of duty warranty that will cover the damages to some of your most critical communication gear. Every month, ComGear Supply saves cops all around North America about $1,500 because they replace damaged gear due to cracked housing, pulled cables, water damage, and more. Me personally, I always pulled cables on my radio gear. From physical altercation to an accidental drop, ComGear Supply has you protected with that line of duty warranty. You can find tactical headsets, push to talks, earpieces, mics, and so much more in their line of duty collection. You can also check out gear from Otto, Xilinx, Invisio, and other reputable brands at the best prices available. You can also check out gear from Otto, Xilinx, Invisio, and other reputable brands at the best prices available. Find all-time favorites like the Noise Barrier Micros from Otto or the XPR Push-to-Talk from Xilinx. With year-round sales, tax-free prices, and free shipping, you're guaranteed to get quality communication gear at a fair price. Go to ComGearSupply.com right now and use that coupon code TheSquadRoom to get 10% off your order. Make sure you also follow them on Instagram at ComGearSupply and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Squad Room. I think it's an interesting point in comparison of stuff like an armorer's course to YouTube videos. I'm a visual learner myself. If you gave me written instructions on how to break down an AR-15, I would struggle. But if I can watch a 3-minute video on it and watch someone else do it, I can follow along nice and easy. It's just that's how my brain works, and to me, the online stuff is very open to that. And you make an interesting point as well about the the exposure element, and what I would also say that there's a stress inoculation that needs to happen in a lot of these things, like the de-escalation training, where like you said, in my academy, I remember over and over and over again, we were exposed to the role playing, which is still very much a pretend environment, but it's still ramping you up towards that one day when you finally get on the street, and the very first time someone doesn't do what you asked them to do, and you have that shit moment where you're like, well, now what? that can't be that can't be replicated in an online environment, that tension and stress, and then getting yourself into a situation where you're comfortable interacting with people who are disagreeing with you or are outright not complying with you, and not going into code black. It's certainly a balance, because I'm in, as I mentioned, and most people know, I'm in California, and we have a lot of rules, and we have a lot of post restrictions, or a lot of post requirements rather. I don't think that's a bad thing, but when you have a limited budget, when you have a limited training cadre, and you have competing demands on time, you've got short staffing, you've got you're trying to backfill behind the guys who go to the training, etc., 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 there's always a reason not to train, right? And there's always some good reasons not to train, those ones I just mentioned. I mean, they're from an agency organizational perspective, from their perspective, but at the same time, of course, they know we need to train, we're a liability if we don't. Constant balance going on. And so, how are you seeing agencies successfully implement either online training or the networking that they're doing through your network to maximize the output of their people?
It's interesting because, you know, you just said something that just kind of popped off in my head where you said, it's a liability if we don't train. You know, it's also a massive liability
Well, if you don't train correctly,
if we
but
don't train correctly. And so that's kind of, that's at the core of a lot of the things that we put together here.
Mhm,
I'll say this over and over again, and always have and I always will, that I'm not an expert. Like, that's not my role in all of this. I'm a facilitator. And
mhm,
so when so your agency says, "Hey, Adam, we're looking at X, Y, or Z training," I go, "Hey, that's awesome. Here are instructors and companies in your region and around the country that I know are the best at what they do in that specific subject matter.
Hmm.
Here's access to them. Now you have to figure out which one works best for you. Again, what works best for you, right?
Yeah.
There's too
Right.
many
Right.
times organizations go, oh no, we only work with this trainer or this company, or we only use this system or this weapons platform. That's great for maybe one person or two people or 30 or 40 agencies. It's not the right thing for everybody. And so we've been very cognizant when we built out our platform, even with partners that we have partners that are in direct competition with one another, either in their own state, in their own city sometimes, definitely with teaching the same subject matter across the country. And it's a very simple conversation I have with all of them. I said, we don't buy into the high school drama bullshit here, team. Like, I like what you're teaching and I like what you're teaching. So either you can both be here and we can build each other up, or if you don't, kick rocks. It's pretty simple. And everybody knows that. And everybody who comes to ILET understands that it's not everything that we do. It's not about profit generation. It's not about, building huge training companies. Man, let me tell you what, even if we stay on the trajectory that we currently are, I'm definitely not retiring until I'm like 175 at this point. So it's not about the money. It's about putting out the best quality training. And that's every single instructor, every trainer, every person who jumps into ILET and supports this has that exact same mission and value system that we do, which is put out the best training, right? Um,
So
when
why is
agencies,
that? Let me jump in. Sorry to interrupt
yeah,
you, but let me
go
jump in
ahead.
because this brings up an interesting point. Like, so why is this your like? You left the armed forces and you could literally do anything. Um, you chose this as your path. Why is it that this was important to you? You didn't come from a history in law enforcement where you saw these things as being, systemic or endemic of issues within policing. So I'm just curious, like, it's an interesting flag to plant, um, when you have a background in training like you do, and I understand that part of it. But what is it that when you left and you thought this is what I'm going to do? That because there's obviously a passion in you about training and presenting the best possible training out there, but the amount of work it takes to do what you've done is I mean, it's a massive amount of work. So I'm just curious, like, what is it that made you think this is what I'm going to go do and this is why it's important to me?
It wasn't an immediate epiphany. I'll tell you that much. It was a work in progress. It still is, right? Obviously, everybody who's put on a uniform, doesn't matter if it's law enforcement, military, first responders, you have that call to serve,
Right.
right? Um, and for the most part, people that are instructors and that are lifetime instructors also catch the bug and want to just train. That's it's kind of
I
it's
found that
just
to be very true. Yes. Yeah.
it's
Uh-huh.
it's it's just instilled in you. Like the second you get it, you're like, "Yep, I'm going to be doing this the rest of my life." Like that's it. There's really no other way to explain it. And if you know, you know, and if you don't, tough shit. So the what happened was when I left the military, I left because I had a significant spinal injury, which is permanent. I can't, so my ability to join, I had lots of requests from friends. I have so many friends and family in law enforcement. And so I did grow up around law enforcement. I was always involved with it. And again, involved in the training side of things as well. But when I left the military, obviously the logical transition and what happens a lot, even in the United States, is you transition from your time with the armed forces and you transition into some type of law enforcement. I wasn't able to do that because of the medical condition that I have. And so I couldn't do that. And my thought goes back to this call to serve,
Hmm.
right? I can't do what I want to do now. I couldn't do what I want to do when they wanted to kick me out. They didn't kick me out of the military. It was a voluntary release, but they basically wanted to take me out of my role in the infantry and put me on a desk somewhere. So I
Hmm.
told them to, where they could shove that job offer. I left and I jumped into the private sector and I said, how can I still do what I love to do and how can I be involved with this? It's really a family, right?
Hmm.
The military is a family. Law enforcement is a family. That camaraderie is what I wanted to have. I didn't want to lose that. And so I knew I wanted to stay involved in the industry, and I just didn't know how. And then I tacked on my passion for training, and then I said, well, shit, this is something that I'm very good at. Maybe I can put two and two together. And that's kind of how I got rolled into it. Initially, it wasn't just law enforcement. We were doing stuff for everybody, military, first responders, everybody. And we hyper focused into law enforcement, and then we've now scaled back out to a larger group to cast a wider net. But it comes down to I want to say it comes down to participation ribbons when they started handing those out. But the concept is this, is that I can't be there. I'm not the officer on the ground that's going to show up when my friends and family need them. It's not going to be me. I can't be
Mhm.
that person. So somebody else is going to be showing up. What can I do to make sure that the person that's showing up to that call when somebody needs them is the best equipped and is most capable to handle that situation so that everybody walks out of that safely? That to me is my motivation. So I can't
Mm.
be that person, but what I can do is I can affect change to make sure that when training occurs, when that officer becomes trained, that they are the absolute best versions of themselves that they can be. And that when they show up to support my family, my community, they're the best equipped and they're the most ready to do that job. And so that's my motivation in what we do here. It's really it's simple, super simple to me. It's I just want to make the community and this family that we have safer, and that's it. And so, it is a passion thing. It's not something for everybody. Like you said, man, I work 14, 16-hour days. I also have four kids, 1, 2, 3 and 4 years old. The toll that takes on family, on relationships, on everything, on the body,
Yep.
right? My wife and I joke, we don't sleep. I haven't slept in 4. If you determine sleep, we've termed sleep as anything over 3 hours consecutively. I haven't slept in 4 years,
Yeah.
right? And so the funny thing is, I always make this joke that the government spent hundreds of thousands of dollars making sure that I can function on little to no sleep, and I'm taking advantage of it now. Um, the it's really just a passion thing. It's I get up every single day, and my wife gets pissed at me because she says all you do is talk to your friends all day. And it really is that simple. It's not that I'm just talking to my friends. It's not just that you and I get to jump on this call and have a conversation. It's that I found a way to find something that I'm extremely passionate about where when I show up every day, I'm excited to show up to it. And I get to talk with people that are like-minded, that share the same mission and values that I do, and are equally as excited about what we're talking about. And I've just so happened to turn that into a business by, the grace of God, turned it into an actual functioning business. Um, whether it functions well or not, that you could probably have somebody who's a lot smarter in business than I am, and they'd probably tell me that I suck at it. But again, it comes down to what can we do to affect change right now? What can we do as a community just to raise the entire ocean and get all ships up to the highest level possible? So I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. In fact, as you're talking, I was thinking to myself, I've asked a lot of questions on this podcast over, you know, what, 160 some episodes or something like that, 150 episodes. And I'm not saying it because you're face to face with me right now, at least virtually, but that's one of my favorite answers to a question I've ever asked because the ownership in there, because, and well, it reminds me of a quote, one of my favorite quotes. It was a quote I used in my TED talk, even. uh, Nobel laureate Romain Rolland said, "A hero is a man who does what he can." And I really believe that. And it doesn't mean that you're the one on the front line or the one going into the burning building or the one going kicking the door on the homicide or whatever it is. But finding where you best serve others is that, you know. And uh, I'm even doing a talk on it later this month on just that simple concept. And and so for me, when I hear you talk about how you see your way of serving in this way, and that's your way of serving, it's really cool because you've probably figured this out if you didn't know already. That cops can be a sarcastic and cynical and suspicious bunch of people, right? And to a fault. I mean, way to a fault. Like we got to drop a lot of that armor that we put on to protect our egos a lot of the times. So to wade into that is admirable to begin with and gutsy, but to see that you have this ability to connect people, connect dots, share ideas, and that's where you can serve and make people safer, make people better, make your family safer. It's really inspiring is a cheesy word, but it's actually that's what I'm thinking. And it's motivating to hear that. And I think that any officer listening can look at whatever position they're in, if they're in the training cadre or they're out on the street, and is how can I best serve those around me? And there's a great lesson for us on all that. So that's really neat. So shifting gears just a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the international part of the International Law Enforcement Training Network, and you also had the International Law Enforcement Training Summit, which had like 10,000 people from like 75 countries. That's amazing. But you're in this unique position to see issues across a spectrum, right? And what's going on in the United States, and what we saw in 2020 were how issues in Minneapolis affected issues in Paris, and in other states or other cities and other countries. And it was really fascinating to watch this ripple effect from Minneapolis go outward. And we felt it over here in California, of course. You felt it in Canada, and watch it go out. And then watching some of the issues around the pandemic kind of, flutter out into the world. Where are you seeing consistencies in terms of what different regions or countries are struggling with? What are we all dealing with?
The law, like if you take the world as a one singular entity, the troubles and the issues tend to all kind of fall into the same categories, which is really interesting. And when you take an event like what happened with George Floyd, um, those that it got such immediate international coverage that it did shape the landscape of law enforcement around the world, right?
Yep.
One of the biggest problems, though, and this is something that was just recently addressed with the whole Kim Potter trial. Too many times, what'll happen is there'll be an incident that occurs and it gets attention, whether it's due attention or undue attention, whether it was right or wrong, it gets some type of media attention and it goes out and it spreads like wildfire. What happens is and this isn't a US problem or a Canada problem, it's an international problem. People see that and they go, we need to make a policy procedure change right now so that this doesn't happen to us, so that we can appease our community, our public, our government, whatever, insert person you want to suck up to here. The problem is that all of those changes, those wholesale changes are made without any thought to scientific foundations and principles, research, facts, data. It's all just gut shot, like make a decision, make a change, and hope it works. And we're just too quick to make changes. It's funny because it's kind of two sides of the same coin. We're like, man, we really want to make changes. There's so many things that we can change, and we want to do it, and it's just taking so long to do it. And then on the other side, we're like, whoa, buddy, like slow it down a minute, right? Like, let's actually figure out what's going on here. What was the root cause of an incident that happened? What was the root cause of Chauvin's actions on that day? What actually led to that? Because it wasn't it what I'll tell you what it wasn't. What didn't lead to that was the technique that he used when he put weight on the back of that guy's shoulder blades. That was a symptom of the root cause. And guess what? Has there been any talk yet? Has there been anything that's come out about what actually led to that point? Or is it just Chauvin bad, right? And now he's in jail and now it's good. Okay, but what led there? What happened with that entire what happened with that training from that like the training for Chauvin, training for all of those officers? What are the fail safes, the policies and procedures that are in place for those junior officers? What all of these things that just got swept under the rug because well we got him, he's convicted and now we're good. It doesn't make any sense. And you're seeing that in every single country, people are making snap decisions to make a change, to charge an officer, to do whatever it is, but without looking at the root cause, and then they leave it. And then it takes somebody like us or some like Force Science is phenomenal at doing research on these types of things,
Yeah.
but it takes a long time to get there. And so in the interim, what ends up happening is we make these wholesale changes to policies and procedures that end up harming us even more in the long run and in the immediate with officers that are currently doing the job right now. And so that's one thing that I've seen kind of across the board that's super frustrating, is this just need to just like make an immediate change when something occurs. Something hits the international media and all of a sudden everybody tries to pander to whoever it is that they're pandering to say like, oh, we're doing something, we're being proactive. If there's one universal truth in law enforcement is that nobody's freaking proactive. It's all reactive. We're trying. There are, and I say that and I'm being somewhat hyperbolic. Obviously, there are some phenomenal agencies and phenomenal trainers that are out there, policymakers, chiefs that are pushing the envelope and trying to make sure that they stay ahead of the curve. But it's not the majority. And when we look at things with ILET, I can't say I don't just work with the agencies that are at the cutting edge of stuff because they're already, we're just developing this instructor development program that we're going to be rolling out. It's in conjunction with IADLEST, with ILETA, Force Science. We have the former unit chief for the TTU out of Quantico. We have the director of reality-based training for the Metropolitan Police out of Loughborough University in the UK. We have the Australian Border Force reality-based training program. We have all of these people from international acclaim that are coming together to build out a course that is functioning around instructor development, right? And what we can talk about that at a later date, and I'm sure we'll share information with you and your listeners on that later. But the concept is this: I'm not targeting our target market and audience for that course isn't the people that are already doing it. The people that are already at the cutting edge, I don't need to say, oh, by the way, hey, great work, here's an extra piece for you. They're doing it already. I want to go to the agency whose instructor took their 40-hour instructor course 20 years ago through post and has never even looked at a continuing education credit their entire career, who's taught the same curriculum for the last 20 years and doesn't even ask the partner agency on what they're doing because they are like, what we're doing is good, it works, we haven't had any issues so far. That's the people that we are trying to reach. It doesn't make sense to reach out to the people that are excelling and the agencies that are excelling. It comes down to when we do training, we always talk lowest common denominator, right? Who in the classes you teach to the lowest common denominator, right? You're going to have those all-stars in your class. Those are the people you can usually kind of leave on their own and go, give them a little extra pieces here and there. You spend the majority of your time working with those folks that are struggling, that need that one-on-one attention. That's what ILET is. We're taking the all-stars, the best of the best, and now we're sharing that information with the people that need it. So it's not about trying to just create the best, most high-speed training and most expensive training, and that exists. I don't care about that. What I care about is how do we get the majority of people trained up to a level where they are at their peak performance. So ILET as an organization is really for that group, the majority of the population, not those extreme outliers, the tier 1 units, the SWAT teams. Even though we work with them and we do awesome training with them, that's all good stuff, but that's not the majority of what we do because that's not the people that need it, right? SWAT teams that get unlimited training time and hours, they're not the ones that need additional training from anybody. They can go out and they can source it wherever they want. It's the agency that has zero training time, zero training budget, that their state post dictates 40 hours of training and says, here's 40 hours of training. Oh, by the way, we're not paying for any of it. But you have to have it, otherwise you lose your credentials. That's a bunch of horse shit. So we're like, well, how do we now support those officers and agencies so that the agency and the officer don't have to pay out of pocket to get training that they should have had anyways?
Right.
Right? That's kind of what we're doing there. So from an international perspective, lots of stuff going on. I mean, it's always situation dictates based off of the region, the policy, what it is that we're talking about specifically, right? Because, for example, firearms training in the US is totally different than everywhere else in the world, right? And so we can't it's like comparing apples to Volkswagens. Like it doesn't, they don't correlate, but for certain things we can. Those are some of the commonalities we see across the board.
What's so different about firearms training? I mean, obviously, like places like England, most cops aren't carrying, but like in terms of the training itself, is there a difference?
Oh yeah, massive difference. Most places like you go to Southeast Asia, you go to South America, places like that. Here's you get there, here's your uniform, here's your belt, here's your gun, go, see you later. Like there's
Oh, you
it's
mean like
not
lack of training?
lack of
Okay.
training,
Okay.
Yeah. Um Obviously things are different in Commonwealth countries. So Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, right? Um Gun laws are different. So gun prevalence in Canada isn't anywhere near what it is in the US. So when we run scenarios in training and things like that, we do those kind of worst case scenario type things. But those are usually left for specialty units, right? SWAT
Hmm.
teams, ERT teams. Um, but the majority of stuff that we deal with doesn't involve guns when we're running training because they're just not there. Like we see them, but they're not as prevalent, right? It's so
Right.
um there's a change in that mindset. Um Also the culture of shooting, you have to remember there are phenomenal firearms instructors in every country. I've trained with some guys from like with our JTF team, like our tier one special operations group in Canada here. I've got to work and shoot with some of those guys. They're phenomenal, right? The ERT teams out of the major centers, top level. Same thing in Australia, right? With their federal police force, with the border force, with their units and stuff like that. They're great trainers. But the problem is you have to remember just by per capita, right? We may have 100 super high level firearms instructors in Canada. You may find that in one uh, county in southern Texas. So that's the difference is just the prevalence and the availability of firearms training is so much more prevalent in the U.S. So there's more evolution of training that occurs when more stuff is happening. There's more trial and error, there's more evolution, and there's more um, high quality training that's produced when you have more access to it. So
Sure.
in the US, because there's so much more access to firearms and firearms training, that the standard of training is higher. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some horrible firearms training in the US. There's some absolutely horrendous stuff that's being taught. But at on average, the amount of high level instructors in the US far and exceeds that anywhere else in the world. So there's always a massive need and want for US firearms instructors in other countries. Not to teach when and the critical thinking components, because rules like you talk ROEs, you talk all those types of things for officers in the US is going to be different than it is in Canada or in Australia or wherever else. But the actual fundamental skill set of using a firearm, it's a lot easier to pull that out of the US than it is any other country.
Makes sense. Yeah. Okay. I was curious what you meant by all that. So, while we wrap up here on this conversation on training and international training, Adam, tell people where They can find out more about you, more about ILET, how to become part of the network. Tell us all about where to learn all that.
Yeah, well, first off, dude, man, massive thank you to you for having me. Hopefully we can continue to do this back and forth over and over again till we're old and gray. Um, I let super simple. We try to condense everything into one. Uh, the other thing about police officers, you said that they're super skeptical. 100% agree. Um, the other thing is we have to make it very, we have to make sure that it's not super complicated to get into stuff, or if it takes you 27 clicks and 5 web pages and all this kind of stuff to find out where things are, I'm not even going to do that. So ILET dot network. Everything's under one roof. It's right there for you. You can check out the podcast stuff, the tactical breakdown. I think you guys are listed on there as well. All the other podcasts that we associate with on our network. The training is in there, some of the free training videos, and the new ILET community that's being launched pretty much as we speak. We're putting it together. So whenever this comes out, it may already be up there. But all the links will be right through the website, the ILET community. All the information about the community is on there. This instructor development program we talked about. And yeah, man, that's just the best place to go.
Excellent. And we'll put all those links in the show notes too, of course, for everybody can't access that right away. But if you need to reference it, you can just go to the show notes for this episode and you can check that out there. Adam, it's been a long time coming having you on the squad room. It's been years in the making almost at this point. We spoke recently, unrecorded, but we had a long conversation about what you're building out in your network and the training platform that you're developing, and it's fascinating. And I think it's going to be, um, I don't use the word lightly, revolutionary in the way that training is delivered and networked amongst trainers. So we will make sure that our audience here stays connected to that or aware of that when and as it progresses. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So thanks for being
Well,
with us today, Adam.
you're more than welcome, brother.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're new to the show, make sure you check through our catalog of episodes because you're going to find some amazing guests and some great actionable ideas you can take into your day. Also, I want to offer you something I'm very excited about, and it's absolutely free. It's my Tactical Tuesday newsletter. Every Tuesday, I want to bring you a few tactics, tips, and strategies to help you succeed in the week ahead. It may be a book I want to share, some gear I found useful, an inspiring quote, or anything else I think you'd like. To sign up for the Tactical Tuesday email list, you can visit thesquadroom.net/Tactical Tuesdays, or just text your email address to 805-364-2331. That's 805-364-2331. If you didn't catch that, check the show notes for this episode, and you can find it there, and I promise we won't sell or spam your email address. Before we wrap up, I have a challenge for you. If you got something out of this episode, if you were inspired by our conversation today, I want to challenge you right now to take a photo of your podcast player as you're playing this episode, and I want you to share it with 3 friends, people who you think need to hear what we talked about today. Send them this episode and recommend that they listen to it. Also, please consider leaving a review on the podcast player of your choice. If you have a few seconds, please leave a comment with your review because it really helps us spread the word about the show and it helps more cops find the valuable lessons that we have here. Also, join us on Facebook at our Facebook group, follow our page, and on Instagram at The Squad Room. A special thanks to our sponsor for today's episode, ComGear Supply. If you're looking for the best prices and industry-leading warranty coverage on your radio equipment, make sure you check them out and use the coupon code The Squad Room to get 10% off your order. Also, there are some other great companies who support the podcast and support you as well. Go to thesquadroom.net/support to see exclusive deals from Signature Coins, Hard to Kill Fitness, Onnit, Ranger Up, Hardhead Veterans, and Audible. And if you're looking for the best fitting ballistic helmet that exceeds NIJ standards and won't break the bank, check out hardheadveterans.com and use the coupon code SQUADROOM to get $20 off your helmet. All right, until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.